and welcome to the new podcast, The Good Way, with me, Torrin Brown, Pilgrim Officer at Canterbury Cathedral. This is the first episode of a new series of podcasts I'll be recording based around all things pilgrimage. So hopefully along the way I'll be talking about my experiences and inviting people in to share their knowledge and experience with me and with you all. And I'm really thrilled and happy to say today, on my first ever episode of this series, I have Sandy Brown with me, who is a highly regarded and greatly renowned author of some of the best pilgrim books we have out there. He's been honoured for his contributions to pilgrimage. Everybody who is in the pilgrimage world knows him and loves him very much. And it's a real honour for me to have him in the studio today, all to myself, because the last time I saw him, I was working at the cathedral and was really too busy. And then a couple of times later, we were at AGMs or book launches, and there were crowds of people around him, so I couldn't get to him. So really nice to have him here, all to myself today, so we can talk about our experiences and go a bit deeper in our conversation that we've had the chance to do in the past. Sandy, you've walked over 18,000 kilometres of pilgrimage in your time, so it's a great honour and a privilege to have you here. Welcome to this, my first episode. I'm so happy that you're here for my first episode of The Good Way. So hello, Sandy Brown, and welcome to the show.
What a pleasure to be here with you today, Torrin. I'm honoured to be your first guest. I'm able to be here in speech thanks to an AI program called ElevenLabs. Otherwise, it's very hard for me to speak quickly and clearly. Thanks so much for your patience with all this tech, Torrin. The expressions are sometimes random, so it may make me sound a little glib at times.
As I said, I mentioned earlier that maybe I was trying to write down some questions as if it were some kind of interview, but I didn't want that to happen. I'd rather it just be an interesting conversation, just like a chat, which I think what a podcast is all about. It's just a relaxing environment to talk about things. So we'll take it from there, I think. And
It's more spontaneous this way.
You're absolutely right, yeah. So where do I start? By chatting to Sandy Brown. I mean, you've got so much under your belt since I think I read your first pilgrimage in 2008. Tell me a little something about the beginnings of that.
You're making me feel very special, Torrin. Actually, I'm nothing special. Just another seeker who is looking to find something on pilgrimage.
Okay, that's a typically humble thing that someone like yourself or a pilgrim would say. It is a search.
As soon as I heard about the Camino de Santiago, I wanted to walk it. After 16 years of waiting, I finally was able to make my first pilgrimage in 2008, and I wasn't disappointed. I think a lot of us find something surprising when we walk long distances, and that's true for me. Right now, I'm planning my upcoming pilgrimages, which should cover about 2,500 kilometers this year.
Wow, that's a big project coming up. And you said when you first heard about the Camino to Santiago, it kind of captured your imagination. You wanted to walk it, right? Was that something that was just sparked your imagination? Did something push you out onto the road? Was it a faith-based thing? The reason I walked the Camino was that I had a bit of a rupture in life, a little bit of a catastrophe. The rug was pulled out from under my feet, and I went in search for meaning to try and face this thing that had just happened to me, where I kind of lost everything in life, and I needed to face it and walk into the wilderness, wrestling with God, wrestling with everything that had just happened to me. Not to maybe find an answer, but in search for meaning, with the faith that the road may lead me somewhere. But in your case, was it something different to an event like that?
I am really with you in the search for meaning. I think a lot of us are looking to find that on the Camino. For me, I was at a seam in my life, a time between two careers. I had stepped out of ordained ministry to run a nonprofit, and I was looking to take a breath. I had heard about the Camino from a book by Paulo Coelho, and that coincided with my interest in my own roots in Spain on my mother's side. So it seemed like a great time to head out, and I was ready for an adventure.
Oh, that's great. That's interesting.
That first Camino experience for me was transformative. I was hooked. What I thought I wanted was quiet for reflection and meditation, What I discovered I really needed, though, was time for community with other pilgrims. My first Camino friends formed into a family, and after days of walking together, we had an unbreakable bond. That's happened to me every time I've walked the Camino.
That's a very interesting point. I felt the same thing. It's what they call a sense of communitas. It's the spontaneous, transient meeting together of strangers with a common purpose, and the sharing of meals and sleeping quarters if you stay in a dormitory, and stories along the way. And that struck a note with me, what you just said, Sandy, because when I started out, I was in a pretty bad place. I wanted to be alone. The sight of a pilgrim on the horizon upset me because I thought my space was being intruded. But you can't help but be sucked into the pilgrim family.
That's exactly what happened to me. As I took the train to the start of my pilgrimage, I was annoyed that there were other people on the train with backpacks and hiking boots. I felt like there were intruders. On the first day, though, that changed. I made my first friends, and then I started looking for other people to be in relationship with. On subsequent Caminos, I was with people that I already knew, and they were surprised that I was immediately so eager to meet strangers and get to know them. They were surprised that I wasn't more private, but I was actually anxious to let that magic begin again.
You're right. And when I've been on much smaller pilgrimages since, I have been looking out for other pilgrims to engage with rather than to avoid.
The eagerness comes from experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember sitting on a dormitory bed one day, and it was packed, and I was feeling very uncomfortable because dormitory life is not for everybody. And I just heard these people talking in all sorts of different languages from around the world, and to me it was just a noise I didn't recognize. No one was speaking English. And I thought, isn't that strange? We're just these creatures who make these sounds that come out of our mouths with our throat, and they that form of communication with each other. But there was one language which was universal, and that was the sound of laughter. And that really struck me at that moment. No matter where in the world you're from, that means the same thing. And I think that was the tipping point for me to really think I am part of something bigger. I'm part of more of a family. And then when the stories of other pilgrims started unfolding, some of them were so profound and so tragic in some cases that it made me feel so humble that my little story, my personal catastrophe in life, at the time was obviously meant a lot and was very serious to me, but it makes you humble when you think of what had happened to others. And I think, well, there, but for the grace of God, go I. And sometimes you have to be thankful for what you don't have in life, you know.
Yep, the Camino becomes a sharing of struggles and weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Then when we open ourselves to each other in that way, there's a form of tenderness that develops. With the tenderness comes friendship, and the friendships are strengthened over many days of walking together. We share our humanness in other ways too. We all need to take a shower, we all need to eat, we all need to rest. The rhythm of the day is shared no matter our background, and it all makes our common humanity become more clear.
I was struck one day by the cultural differences. There are a lot of young Korean kids walking the Camino. And one day I carried too much food in my rucksack. And I thought, this is ridiculous, it's too heavy. So one evening I'm just going to cook the whole lot and cook for everybody. And the people staying in the hostel that night were these Korean kids, whole group of them. So I cooked for them, sat them down, served the meal, and they refused to eat anything until I had sat down and joined them because of this filial piety they have, respect for their elders. Because I was carrying on washing up and doing some things at the sink. So I sat down and took my first mouthful, and they all joined in and we had a lovely meal. Then afterwards I cleaned up the plates from the table, and they looked in absolute shock because I started to do the dishes as well. To them, they were almost ashamed that not only did this elder cook for them, but cleaned up and washed for them, and they were insisting that they did it. And I said, no, come on, you're young, go out and have some fun because, before the next day's walk. And this one young man, he was so anxious and so upset by this. In the end, I just had to give him a big hug and say, look, please, everything's okay. And then later on, two of them appeared quietly, silently in the room with a chocolate and a tangerine as a gesture of thanks. And it brought tears to my eyes. I thought it was such a beautiful, tender moment of that shared common humanity and cross-culture.
You are very sweet. I'm sure that was quite memorable to them, and it was to you too. And what a nice gesture of thanks. It reminds me of a time on the Camino. There had been a huge rainstorm and everyone was soaking wet. At the hostel that evening, the sun came out, and since there was a pool in the backyard, everyone jumped in the water. Soon we were having a diving competition among the nationalities, and the Koreans won. The funny thing was that no one had swimsuits. We were in our underwear and nobody cared.
Oh, that's lovely. That's really funny. There's a certain magic about the Camino, and I don't use that word lightly because holiday memories can fade over time. But the Camino just seems to get stronger in my memory and grows and almost is constantly calling you back onto the road with a louder voice. Now, you say you were bitten by the bug. That clearly happened to you because you've not stopped since your route to Compostela.
It did happen to me, but there's a difference once you get off the Camino. In a way, the Camino de Santiago is a rarefied experience since there are so many people there. You're never really walking alone. On the other, less traveled Caminos, there is much more solitude. That is something I've actually come to love. For instance, on the Via Francigena, I walked for a month and never saw another pilgrim.
Okay. Was that through the French section, which I've heard is a lot of agricultural land and pretty sparse?
Indeed. That was through France.
Yeah, I've heard that.
France is a challenge on the Via Francigena, and it really takes some inner strength to deal with the solitude at first. After that, a person gets into a new rhythm, and it also becomes wonderful in its own way. In Italy, on the Francigena, there is a lot more company.
That's interesting. That's an interesting dynamic. So how do you feel then when you come out of like a month of solitude to suddenly be hit by crowds of people, especially in Italy?
Yes, I agree. In Italy, I fell in love with the culture, so I ended up moving there.
I remember hearing this story. You now live in Lucca.
That's right. On the Francigena, I walked into Lucca and sat down in a piazza. I sipped my tea, looked around me, and said, I would like to live here. 5 years later, my wife and I were living in an apartment just 100 meters from that place.
That's a lovely story.
It's a great town. I was attracted to the notion of living in a place without cars. So frankly, I would have been happy in a dozen other places along the Francigena too. In a quiet walk like the Via Francigena, there is an oscillation between rural and urban that becomes important. The rural experience gives you quiet and builds up an appetite for other people. Then the urban experience makes you long for the quiet. But I appreciate the urban experience more and more after spending many days in the quiet and the open countryside. Something that is an underappreciated aspect of pilgrimage walking is the reconnection with nature. It happens in the vast distances between cities, in farmland and forests and mountain meadows. The beauty of the earth really begins to speak to you, and the times with nature become very precious.
Yeah, to have that amount of time alone, not only with yourself processing your own thoughts, but then you do become one with the natural world around you. And I found that a really, really interesting experience because I've never been alone with nature for that long before in my life. And it is a wonderful opportunity. You're slowing down. It's not a blur in the windows of the countryside going past. You're almost engaging with it and interacting with it in a way.
Exactly. I think that it speaks to an ancient experience of being human. The urban noises of today tend to draw away our consciousness, while the quiet of walking tends to open us up. When we re-engage with the sounds of technology, it's quite jarring. Sometimes the sound of a car motor feels almost violent. There's a human scale to the sounds of wind and birdsong. It takes quiet like that to reconnect with ourselves, I think. It is very magnetic, and once it happens for a day, you want it for a week. I look forward to those times, and that is quite different than my initial experiences among other people on the Camino de Santiago.
Because it brings a certain conditioning to your mind that is maybe alien. But sometimes when you're scrolling through your phone, it's all very quick and immediate. And they say there's a dopamine fix attached to that's addictive. And I think the reverse could be true. There might be a dopamine effect to not engaging with anything like this for hours or days on end and being in that solitude in the countryside. That also can become addictive, for want of a better word. Puts you in a place that is so alien to us these days. And yet once we're there, maybe we find a certain absolute pleasure being there.
Yep, it's breathing space for our heart and soul.
Which is ultimately the core of who we are.
The other thing about being in nature is that we become attuned to its rhythms, and they make sense with our bodies. Dawn, morning, noon, afternoon, late afternoon, evening. We experience all of these things along with wind, rain, heat, cold. Walk outside is a way to wake up and get back into our bodies. I think that makes a deep sense for us, and we don't get that with technology like light bulbs and heating systems and air conditioning. So it's really a gift to be outside for long stretches, for days on end.
Because it does definitely help us wake up to things that we take for granted, like birdsong, maybe how vulnerable and fragile we are out in the face of nature when it gets tough.
We kind of live in a pillow with all the comforts of the modern world. And when we're walking between towns on a 1,000-kilometer pilgrimage, it's a wake-up. They do this thing now called forest bathing. And I think anyone who's experienced a pilgrimage of many weeks understands exactly what that's about.
Yeah, I found that after a while I became so comfortable. At first I was a little bit anxious. No matter what direction I looked in, I didn't see a sign of life on the horizon. And I thought to myself sometimes, God, what if I had a heart attack? What if something happened? I'm stuck out here and I'd have to wait for hours until the next pilgrim comes along and finds me. But after a while, I became so comfortable out there. And it is like Owen Barfield wrote this beautiful, talking about medievals. He said that they would treat and live in nature as if it were a cloak wrapped around them rather than a stage on which they walked. And the Camino does that. They did that to me. It made nature feel like it was a cloak, a protective home, a warm and wonderful place to be after that initial stage of being a fish out of water and out of my comfort zone and feeling very anxious.
Even on the Camino, it's possible to find that solitude in nature. I was watching a new Camino movie called The Way, My Way by the Australian director Bill Bennett, and in the Q&A afterward, someone asked him why there were no people on the Camino in his movie. He mentioned that he liked to film at dawn and at dusk, and at those times on the Camino, everyone is already settled in their lodging, so the Camino pathways are very quiet. I realized he's right, but I'd never thought about it before.
Yeah, when the way is clear of pilgrims, I walked mine in March, and so it was very off-season. And that was a hell of a struggle because town after town, a lot of places were closed. And there were no facilities and hostels were closed. And at some point I was really struggling and couldn't find any food or sustenance or a place to stay. So it was a real challenge. But those times, that's what it does. It makes you dig deep and find a solution. And my most pivotal moment was when I said, I stopped worrying and searching on Google and trying to sort out everything for myself. I took a step back and said, in your hands, God. I was right at the end of my tether, no food. I was dizzy with hunger and with dehydration, and I couldn't go any further. And I said, in your hands, Lord, I can't do any more. Now's the great lesson to learn that I can't do anything about these things. It is in God's hands ultimately. And it was a wonderful moment I'll never, ever forget because I carried on going. And then within about 2 or 3 minutes, I came across this beautiful cafe in the middle of nowhere, full of pilgrims and hot food and everything I could have wanted. And I didn't even see it on Google Maps or anything like that. It was almost like it was a dream looking back.
That's very cool. I love how you entrusted yourself to God in that moment. So, a question for you. Did you find what you were looking for on your Camino?
It's very hard to answer because I was kind of expecting an epiphany. I was hoping to reach the shrine and maybe feel something and have an answer or for something to happen that I can say, this is what it's all about. And nothing did. But I think in answer to your question, yes, but it's taken a lot longer. And I think I came back to Canterbury thinking, well, what am I going to do next? I'm nearly 60 and I've been out of work for so long. I don't have anything anymore. I've sort of lost my family home and everything that came with it. And I was struggling to find work at that age. And I didn't know what to do next. And then somebody made this most ridiculous suggestion that I should apply to come to university and read a degree in theology. And I was so, at the time I was really angry that that was their only solution. But in the morning I woke up with a fire in my belly and thought, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Suddenly doors started opening. The university said yes. The student loan company said yes. I got some student accommodation. I got a part-time job at the cathedral. I made my whole dissertation and work around pilgrimage, ended up with a beautiful degree in theology, and now I'm working full-time at the cathedral. So it's almost like God said, I need you to do something for me. And he swept everything aside in my life, because if you're just asked to do something, you might come up with all sorts of excuses as to why you can't do it. But when everything's swept asunder and you have nothing but this one road to walk down, it forced me down that road, which I would have never dreamed of years beforehand. So there is an answer in a way, but it wasn't what I was looking for. And I guess it'll be ongoing.
That's a beautiful story. I'm so happy it came together for you in that way, Torin. I'm also delighted that through your openness, you have this new ministry, which is already a help for many, many people who are launching their search like you did.
Thank you. Thanks, Sandy, for saying that. That's true, and it does feel like a bit of a ministry. And that really leads into something else I wanted to ask you about, because in a way, what you've done since your first Camino is such a rich legacy of work. You've got 7 books of Camino guides for a start. Then I found your 7 sermons, the 7 steps to a new life. Now, we can find your personal webpage on Caminoist, but then there's also your more travel business page of pilgrim paths, right? So you're doing an incredible amount. But from your guidebooks, one thing that struck me the other day, a lovely pilgrim turned up at the cathedral, Sister Elizabeth Carr, a nun who's walking to Rome, and she had your book. And she said the most beautiful thing. She said, I'm walking alone, but I feel like Sandy's walking with me, because she felt so secure having all of your experience and your knowledge and the research and the work you've done in that little book. She felt safe walking with you in her pocket. And I thought, wow, that's such a wonderful thing to hear. But it's true.
That's really sweet to hear. I've heard that from other people as well. That's really the reason why I've spent my time walking and researching and putting together guidebooks for pilgrims. I want to help make what I've experienced happen for other people as well. It's great to hear that people are appreciating my work, and it's very humbling as well. I hope the sister made it okay and had a good experience.
Well, I asked her to send a photograph of when she arrives in Rome, so I'll put it on Instagram and tag you, and then you can see the picture too, hopefully.
Thanks, Torin. Something else that brings to mind is that in addition to nature, there is another presence that's really felt on pilgrimage. It's the presence of the church. The rhythm of pilgrimage is nature, city, church, nature, city, church. At least for me, I am always looking to find the cathedral or basilica that represents the town. So when I think of a Camino city, I think of the church there. My wife says that I give directions based on the location of churches. And that's true. I love resting, sitting in the cool of a cathedral and looking for its message as I walk and pause on each Camino. So it makes sense to begin at Canterbury in its cathedral and end at Rome and its basilica. The culture of each place is represented in each church, but also the thread that joins them all together, which is the thread of faith. So pilgrimage walking is very much about faith to me, and on each Camino walk I am generally looking for a particular story or representation or saint that I will identify with. On the Camino de Santiago, I am always looking for the representation in churches of Santiago, St. James. It's fascinating to see that from an art history perspective, but it's also important to me as a framework on which I interpret my experience. So each cathedral has something to say. Canterbury is about English history and the culture of the Church of England. Reims is about the history of France and also about the experience of the First World War. Lausanne is about the Reformed Church in Switzerland and the Reformation. Rome is about the power and glory of the Catholic popes of centuries past. Continuing on past Rome is about Spanish and Greek influences on the story. Bari is about St. Nicholas, while Santa Maria di Lucca is about the Virgin Mary. So I am always looking for the way religious buildings speak to me. It's another influence beyond nature and is really intended as a way to connect with the story of each individual community. Some people don't recognize the ecumenical aspect of the Via Francigena. It begins in Church of England, goes through Protestant Reformation countryside, and then is immersed in Catholic Italy. Quite interesting and ecumenical, more than any other Camino I know about. So walking Caminos touches a couple of parts of my background. The first is medieval history, and the second is my past as a Methodist pastor. My bachelor's degree is in medieval history. I spent 33 years as a Methodist pastor, working in 5 churches during my time as an active cleric.
It was very interesting what you were saying, and I'll pick up on a few things, if I may. Whenever I go into a new town, the first thing I do is go straight for the cathedral or the church if it doesn't have one, because I know that that's going to be the safest place or the safe spot, but they're normally going to be in the centre of the town. So from there you can just go out and find your place to stay, place to eat, but I always go there first. It's a centre of gravity for me, and it's just to take a breath, sit down and relax and plan what we're going to do next. And you're right, when you said you're looking for, from a historical point of view, I never really thought of the Via Francigena that way. It's the ecumenical crossover between those different strands of Christian faith is really, really interesting. And it's a really fascinating way to look at it and to contemplate it, especially for someone like me who has not walked the Via Francigena yet. Because the thing that I found interesting and that I've read about in the past as well is that as you walk towards a shrine, which is usually going to be in a city or a large town, you're going to come out of the rural countryside and get into more suburban and urban areas. So you're going to be coming across more churches, let's say, or places of religion or religious significance. And in those places, you'll come across the imagery, readily accessible imagery of the saint or the religion's founder in his moment of crisis. Thomas Becket here being cut down at the altar, Christ on the cross everywhere, which in Spain is always portrayed in a very graphic and very bloody way compared to our sanitized depictions of Christ here in England, let's say, for example. So if you're walking with your own personal crisis and you see that reflected in the saint, in the images of the saint, I think then you can find some identity with the saint and some assurance or kinship with that saint, which will help you on your journey. And then, of course, when you reach the shrine, and that's accompanied by maybe liturgical music, prayer, other pilgrims around you, maybe weeping or praying, incense, all of these wonderful sensory aspects that almost you just reach this emotional climax in a way that the journey's over. You've reached the shrine. These images have been building up in your mind, subliminally maybe, And then when I got to Compostela, I found this great feeling of sadness that the journey was over, and I was no way prepared for that. I didn't expect it at all. It is on so many levels. It's so powerful on so many levels, from the medieval history, that wonderful historical legacy, and obviously architectural with that, and from the faith base, but also your personal spiritual journey.
So true. You also find the legacy of other pilgrims sometimes in these churches. For instance, buried in Basilica San Frediano is Richard of Wessex, who was walking to Rome on the Via Francigena and died in Lucca. I had no idea that as I sat having tea in the piazza, inside of the church next door, was an English pilgrim who had gone this way 1,300 years earlier and hadn't made it.
Yeah, that is just the beauty of history, isn't it? And we're so fortunate to have that history preserved in our culture that we can do that. I love the fact that there's an American sitting drinking tea in an Italian town, and next door there's an Englishman who's been lying there for 1,300 years. It's just beautiful, isn't it? Beautiful, rich history.
Yep, and San Frediano, after whom the basilica is named, was a monk from Ireland.
God, what do you think? Millions of people must have walked them since they were founded throughout history. And so you're picking up on all of those other people's hopes and dreams and prayers and longings and yearnings, which is the energy, I think, on the path, but as well as the beautiful history and the wonderful stories.
Something about the Via Francigena also is the amount of historical theology that is evident along the way, including traces of people like Anselm of Canterbury, Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, Saint Augustine of Hippo, who is buried in Piacenza, Saint Thomas Aquinas, who is buried south of Rome at Priverno. It's quite surprising how much history is in the pilgrimage trails, and anyone who cares to connect with that really can find a level of depth that adds to the experience.
Well, in that one sentence, you've just given me the motivation, because you've just named three of my great heroes there, Anselm, Aquinas and Augustine of Hippo, and I'd love nothing more than to go and see where they're buried, so I need to hit the road, right?
Stop in when you come through Lucca.
I'd love to, so I'll take you up on that, definitely, Sandy.
It's a great treat to check in with pilgrims as they walk through Lucca. There's an Irish pilgrim named Cathal Kelly who was walking through Lucca. I was aware of his pilgrimage, but I didn't realize he was in town until he tapped me on the shoulder while I was having my cafe latte in Piazza San Francesco in Lucca. It was great to see him on his way to Rome. He raised over 70,000 euros for local charities through his walk, and seeing him that day by surprise in Lucca was a real treat.
What a lovely life and a place to live when things like that have the potential to happen. Well, maybe you might find me tapping on your shoulder one morning, halfway through your coffee.
I would welcome that, Torin.
Thank you. Now, you seem to have a lot of travel coming up. 2,000 kilometres of pilgrimage this year, you were saying, and I know you've just completed the southern route. I was hearing you talk at the annual general meeting of the Confraternity of Pilgrims to Rome, and that's part of your new guidebook. So you're keeping extremely busy. We're listening to you talk tonight at Waterstones, which I'm looking forward to very much. So it's lovely to see that you're still really 100% engaged and got a busy schedule. So I totally appreciate the time that you've taken out of that schedule to come and speak to me today.
It's really a pleasure to be here with you. Yep, this year I'm working on a new edition of my Camino guidebook. So I'll do 800 kilometers of the Camino de Santiago. I'm also cycling the California Mission Trail again, this time with friends. Then I'm having a new experience. I'm researching and writing a tourism guidebook for northern Italy, which will take me to locales north of Tuscany in Italy that I've wanted to see for a long time. I love the travel aspect of what I do, And I feel really blessed to be strong enough physically to keep up with this work.
It's great to hear that you're still so busy, still fully engaged and producing these wonderful books and guidebooks for everyone to help them along their way. And can't wait for you to be back in Canterbury so we can maybe do another episode when you've finished these travels you've got coming up this year.
Well, I'm excited for what you're doing here in Canterbury, and I will be thinking about you as you greet pilgrims to the cathedral here and as you send other pilgrims off on their journeys toward France, Switzerland, and Italy.
Thank you, Sandy. It's been a great pleasure to chat with you today and to have you on my the first episode of my new podcast, The Good Way, as Pilgrim Officer here at Canterbury Cathedral. Thanks for coming along and talking to me today. It's been absolutely brilliant.
The pleasure is all mine, Torin. I wish you the very best in all you do.
Thank you, Torin, for letting me speak with my AI voice. It's very challenging to use my mouth, given my motor neuron disease, and it's challenging to speak, but also to listen to. So even though the AI is not perfect, I think it's the best way for me to communicate right now.
Now, we found a great solution to that, Sandy, and I think that even though I know you were saying it sounds a bit glib sometimes, or the AI voice, it doesn't matter because it's the words that you type. It's reading out the words that you type, and what you're saying comes from the heart. And you can see that there's a lot of meaning behind everything that you say or type into the laptop. So it's just repeating those words which come from a genuinely good place. So I'm really happy to have had that opportunity.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
Well, that's it. Thank you for listening. Thank you to Sandy for being with me today. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you will tune in for some future episodes. Until then, goodbye and buen camino. This podcast was made possible with great thanks to the folks at the Careers and Enterprise Hub at Christ Church, Canterbury University.